Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues, and dear friends, it's difficult to believe, but it's been 4 years since we last gathered in person to commemorate this important occasion. Tonight, I'm honored to join with senior U.S. officials in wishing my Persian friends here in Washington and around the world a very happy Nowruz. We celebrate today not just the dawn of the new year in the Persian calendar, but the possibility of a new day in Iran. I brought my 8-year-old son with me to tonight's event. He knows that his dad studies the democratic resistance and the prospect of democratic change in Iran. But tonight he's meeting individuals that are not just writing about democracy. He's meeting courageous individuals that are seeking to free their homeland from tyranny. On the drive here this evening, we discussed what freedom means, what democracy is, and why individuals the world over fight for civil and political liberties. We discussed how human rights are universal, what happens when governments repress their people, and we discussed how freedom can be delayed, but it cannot be denied. Friends, as we gather tonight, Iranians are preparing to acknowledge almost 200 consecutive days of countrywide protests. The anti-regime rebellion has brought together Iranians from all walks of life, young and old, rich and poor, in more than 282 cities. Reliable intelligence from the opposition's resistance units suggests that there have been upwards of 750 casualties and 30,000 detentions. The dictatorship's disastrous economic policies have left many across the country in extreme poverty. And as a result, many Iranians are now regrettably unable to meet their families' basic human needs. But while these are challenging times in Iran, I have never been more optimistic that the tide is turning. In fact, I've never been more confident in declaring that Tehran's 40-year dictatorship will be replaced by a peaceful, inclusive, tolerant government that upholds human rights and maintains positive relations with the world. Because the cries on the Iranian streets leave no doubt at all, that the Iranian people reject dictatorship in all its forms, past and present, and they're looking towards a democratic future with no interest in returning to their monarchic past. If U.S. officials and Western leaders merely listen to the voices on the Iranian street, they can avoid being caught off guard like they were 44 years ago. You know, at that time, it was widely assumed that the Iranian people would never overcome the Shah's repressive institutions. But 4 decades later, the MEK stands atop the democratic alternative known as the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and it is this organization that is prepared to oversee the country's transition to a modern, secular democracy. Fewer U.S. officials today are questioning whether the Ayatollahs will be toppled. The question now is when the regime's collapse will occur and what can be done to prepare for it. The first thing policymakers can do is acknowledge that regime change from within need not result in chaos, and it need not lead to a lateral shift from one antagonistic dictatorship to another. Because by recognizing the right of Iranian protesters to defend themselves, by ramping up crippling sanctions, by clamping down on the terror regime that calls itself the Islamic Republic, the US can lead the world in isolating and weakening the Ayatollahs and rendering them incapable of resisting the will of the Iranian people. By choosing the right side of history and closing ranks with Iranians struggling for freedom, US officials, including individuals in this room, can seize an historic opportunity, advance global security interest, and support a pro-democracy revolution. So before I close tonight, I'd like to give just a couple of shout-outs. I'm joined tonight by a bipartisan group of senior US officials, prominent academics, and statesmen from around the world who uniformly agree that the world need not fear the prospect of regime change from within. I am so honored that the former chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congresswoman Ilyana Ros-Lehtinen, who just took the podium from my home state of Florida, is here tonight because she has been an extraordinary supporter of the Iranian resistance for more than 3 decades. I'd also like to quickly acknowledge that House Resolution 100 now has 228 co-sponsors. Congressman Tom McClintock from the great state of California is the lead sponsor, and Congressman Brad Sherman, another friend of the Iranian resistance, is the lead Democratic sponsor. And this important legislation does 2 things. Number 1, it calls out Iranian protesters' rejection of the Shah's dictatorship as well as the mullah's theocracy. And number 2, it references Maryam Rajavi's 10-point plan, which calls for the universal right to vote, free elections, a market economy, gender, religious, ethnic equality, a foreign policy based on peaceful coexistence, and a non-nuclear Iran. Over the past just few weeks, we've seen support for this platform gain significantly. We've seen US officials, from General Wesley Clark to Vice President Mike Pence to Senator Jeanne Shaheen, express their strong support for the 10-point plan and their strong support for the NCRI, and I expect that we will see this support grow in the year ahead. And so tonight, as we celebrate Nowruz, I cannot help but consider all that will be realized in the year ahead, from upholding human rights to protecting civil liberties, to encouraging a democratic transition in Iran. There is so much work to do, but I am deeply inspired by the commitment I see in the opposition's campaign for a free Iran, and I look forward to working with you and seeing all that is accomplished in the year ahead. Thank you all so much, and my best wishes to you all.